Welcome back to another episode of True Crime Untold Cases. I'm your host, Harper Quinn. On a cold February morning in 2008, a Lane Bryant store in suburban Chicago became the scene of one of Illinois' most baffling mysteries. What began as a routine shopping day ended in unimaginable horror when a man claiming to be a delivery person entered the store and systematically executed 5 women, leaving a 6th for dead. Despite having the killer's DNA, his voice on tape, and one of the most widely circulated composite sketches in criminal history, this calculated murderer has managed to evade justice for over 15 years. Tonight, we dive deep into the Lane Bryant massacre, a case that continues to haunt investigators and leaves us asking, how does a killer simply vanish without a trace? Let's begin. On a cold Saturday morning in February 2008, just as winter's grip held firm over the Chicago suburbs, the Lane Bryant store in Tinley Park was preparing for what should have been a routine day of business. Located in the Brookside Marketplace shopping center, this clothing retailer catering to plus-size women was one of many stores beginning to welcome its first customers of the day. None of the women present could have imagined that this ordinary morning would become one of the most tragic and perplexing cases in Illinois criminal history. It was February 2nd, just before 10 a.m., when store manager Rhoda McFarland was getting things ready for opening. With her were 5 other women: Jennifer Bishop, Sarah Safransky, Connie Woolfolk, Carrie Chiuso, and a 6th woman whose identity would later become crucial to the investigation. The store wasn't technically open yet, but these women were either employees or early bird shoppers who had been let in before the official opening time. At approximately 10:44 a.m., a man entered the store. Security footage would later show him wearing a dark jacket and a black knit cap. He was described as an African-American male, around 6 feet tall, with a husky build and broad shoulders. What seemed at first like a routine customer interaction quickly turned into something far more sinister. The man claimed to be a delivery person, but once inside, he revealed his true intentions. Drawing a .40 caliber handgun, he announced a robbery. The women were ordered to the back of the store, where he used duct tape to bind their hands behind their backs and force them to lie face down on the floor of a back room. During these terrifying moments, store manager Rhoda McFarland managed to make a desperate call to 911 from her cell phone. The call, which would later become a crucial piece of evidence, captured the horror of what was unfolding. Speaking in hushed tones, McFarland tried to alert authorities without drawing attention to herself. "Lane Bryant," she whispered into the phone, attempting to convey the danger while remaining undetected. The 911 dispatcher later recalled that the call came in at 10:45 a.m. The line remained open, but the dispatcher could only hear muffled voices and movement. Then, suddenly, multiple gunshots rang out. The sounds that followed would haunt investigators and family members for years to come. When police arrived at the scene just minutes later, they found a nightmare waiting for them. 5 women had been shot execution style in the back of the head. Rhoda McFarland, Jennifer Bishop, Sarah Safransky, Connie Woolfolk, and Carrie Chiuso were all dead. The 6th woman, who had also been shot in the neck, somehow survived. She would later become the key witness in the investigation. The crime scene told a story of methodical brutality. The killer had taken few items of value, suggesting that robbery might not have been his primary motive. The precision of the shootings, the method of restraining the victims, and the overall execution of the crime indicated to investigators that this wasn't a simple robbery gone wrong. This was something far more calculated. The surviving victim, whose identity was protected for her safety, provided investigators with crucial details about the killer. She described him as articulate and seemingly educated, noting specific physical characteristics that would later help create a detailed composite sketch. According to her account, the man had thick braided hair, a receding hairline, and a distinct complexion with pockmarks or acne scars on his cheeks. The description led to the creation of what would become one of the most widely circulated composite sketches in Illinois criminal history. The sketch showed a man with distinctive features, including those telltale marks on his face and the characteristic hairstyle. Police believed that someone, somewhere, had to recognize this face. The immediate investigation was massive. The Tinley Park Police Department, assisted by the South Suburban Major Crimes Task Force, launched one of the largest manhunts in the area's history. They collected over 5,800 pieces of evidence from the scene, including the duct tape used to bind the victims, shell casings from the weapon, and various fibers and DNA samples. The 911 call became a crucial piece of evidence. Audio analysts worked to clean up the recording, hoping to capture any distinctive voice patterns or background sounds that might help identify the killer. They could hear him speaking, giving commands to the women, his voice described as commanding but calm, chillingly so, given what he was about to do. In the days following the massacre, the community was gripped by fear and confusion. Lane Bryant stores across the country implemented new security measures. The shopping center where the murders occurred saw a dramatic decrease in foot traffic as people grappled with the reality that such violence could erupt in what had always been considered a safe, suburban environment. The victims' families were left with countless questions and an overwhelming sense of loss. Each woman had her own story, her own dreams, and her own loved ones left behind. Rhoda McFarland, 42, was known for her dedication to her job and her warm personality. Jennifer Bishop, 34, was a South Carolina native who had recently married. Sarah Safransky was just 22, with her whole life ahead of her. Connie Woolfolk, 37, was a mother of 2 young children. Carrie Chiuso, 33, was a social worker beloved by her students and colleagues. The investigation quickly revealed that none of the victims knew each other beyond their chance encounter that morning. They were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, their lives intersecting tragically with a killer whose identity remained frustratingly out of reach. As news of the massacre spread, tips began pouring in. The Tinley Park Police Department established a dedicated hotline, and within the first week, they had received over 4,000 calls. Each tip had to be meticulously followed up, each potential lead investigated. The task force worked around the clock, knowing that time was of the essence in solving any homicide case. But despite the wealth of physical evidence, the detailed witness description, and the thousands of tips, the killer's identity remained elusive. The gun used in the murders was never found, and while DNA evidence was recovered from the scene, it didn't match any profiles in existing databases. The investigation took several intriguing turns in the months following the massacre. One of the most promising leads came from surveillance footage captured at a nearby Target store shortly before the murders. The footage showed a man matching the suspect's description purchasing the duct tape that would later be used to bind the victims. However, despite enhanced analysis of the video, the image quality wasn't sufficient to make a positive identification. Investigators were particularly interested in the killer's apparent familiarity with the area. The Lane Bryant store wasn't visible from the main road, and its location in the shopping center suggested the perpetrator had prior knowledge of the store's layout. This led detectives to explore whether the suspect might have had some connection to retail security or law enforcement, given his methodical approach and command presence. The surviving victim's testimony provided additional details that painted a clearer picture of the killer's behavior during the crime. She described how he engaged in casual conversation with the victims, even discussing mundane topics like the weather and his supposed job as a delivery person. This unusual behavior suggested to criminal profilers that the perpetrator might have committed similar crimes before, showing a level of comfort with controlling multiple victims. Throughout 2008, investigators pursued another angle: the possibility that the crime was connected to a series of other retail robberies in the Chicago area. Several similar incidents had occurred where a single armed perpetrator had targeted stores just as they were opening. However, none of these other cases had escalated to murder, and eventual analysis ruled out any direct connections. The case took another turn when forensic analysis of the shell casings revealed that the murder weapon was a .40 caliber Glock pistol. This detail was particularly significant because this type of weapon was commonly used by law enforcement and security personnel, lending credence to the theory that the killer might have had some professional training. The surviving victim worked extensively with investigators to refine the composite sketch and provide additional details about the killer's mannerisms and speech patterns. She noted that he spoke with what she described as a slight lisp or speech impediment, though it wasn't particularly pronounced. He used phrases that suggested he was educated and well-spoken, avoiding profanity and maintaining an almost professional demeanor throughout the ordeal. By the end of 2008, the reward for information leading to an arrest had grown to $100,000, one of the largest rewards ever offered in an Illinois criminal case. The size of the reward reflected both the severity of the crime and the frustration of investigators who found themselves running out of leads to pursue. The case gained national attention, featured on television shows like America's Most Wanted and Crime Watch Daily. Each media appearance generated new tips, but none led to a breakthrough. The composite sketch of the suspect became one of the most recognized images in American criminal history, yet somehow the killer remained at large. In 2009, investigators began employing new forensic technologies to re-examine the evidence. Advanced DNA analysis techniques were used on samples collected from the duct tape and other items left at the scene. While these tests yielded some new genetic information, the DNA profiles were partial and insufficient for definitive matching. The impact on the Tinley Park community remained profound. The shopping center where the murders occurred never quite recovered its former atmosphere of suburban tranquility. The Lane Bryant store itself never reopened, and the vacant space stood as a grim reminder of the tragedy for years afterward. The victims' families struggled to find closure as the years passed without an arrest. They established support groups and advocacy organizations, working to keep the case in the public eye and support other families affected by violent crime. Annual vigils marked the anniversary of the murders, with attendance gradually dwindling, but a core group remaining dedicated to seeking justice. In 2013, 5 years after the murders, investigators revealed that they had been pursuing a theory involving the killer's possible military background. The precision of the shootings, the tactical approach to controlling multiple victims, and the killer's calm demeanor all suggested someone with specialized training. This angle led to the review of military records and interviews with veterans who matched aspects of the suspect's description, but again, no concrete suspects emerged. The case took another interesting turn when investigators began exploring connections to the trucking industry. The killer's initial cover story as a delivery person, combined with his apparent familiarity with multiple geographic areas, suggested he might work as a long-haul truck driver. This theory could explain why he seemed to vanish so completely after the crimes, and why similar patterns of behavior hadn't been detected in any single location. By 2015, advances in genetic genealogy were beginning to solve cold cases across the country. Investigators submitted the DNA evidence from the Lane Bryant case to several specialized laboratories, hoping to utilize these new techniques. However, the limited quality and quantity of the genetic material recovered from the scene proved insufficient for this type of analysis. The Tinley Park Police Department maintained a dedicated task force for the case, though it was gradually reduced in size as years passed without major breaks. Detective Ray Violetto, who had been with the case since day one, continued to review the evidence regularly, convinced that the key to solving the murders lay somewhere in the massive amount of collected data. In 2016, investigators made another push to resolve the case by implementing advanced audio analysis of the 911 call. Voice recognition experts used new technology to isolate and enhance the killer's voice, hoping to identify any unique speech patterns or background noises that might have been missed in earlier examinations. While they were able to clean up portions of the audio previously thought unintelligible, no breakthrough identifications resulted from this effort. The surviving victim, who had shown remarkable courage throughout the investigation, continued to work with police whenever new techniques for witness recall became available. In 2017, she underwent several sessions with forensic psychologists who specialized in memory enhancement techniques. These sessions revealed additional details about the killer's mannerisms, including the way he walked, described as confident but with a slight asymmetry in his gait, and specific phrases he used that suggested possible regional origins. Detective Violetto and his team began exploring connections to other unsolved crimes across the Midwest, particularly focusing on the period between 2005 and 2008. They discovered several robberies with similar characteristics. A single perpetrator targeting retail locations early in the morning, showing unusual comfort with controlling multiple victims and displaying knowledge of store operations. While none of these cases escalated to murder, the behavioral patterns were similar enough to warrant deeper investigation. In 2018, marking the 10th anniversary of the murders, the Tinley Park Police Department released previously undisclosed details about the crime scene. They revealed that the killer had spent approximately 40 minutes inside the store, far longer than initially reported. This extended timeline suggested that the murders weren't simply a robbery gone wrong, but rather a carefully orchestrated act of violence. The length of time also indicated that the perpetrator had an unusual level of confidence in not being discovered, despite the store's location in a busy shopping center. The investigation took another turn when analysts began examining cell phone tower data from the day of the murders. Although this information had been collected in 2008, advances in data analysis allowed investigators to create a more detailed picture of mobile devices active in the area during the critical time frame. They identified several phones that showed suspicious movement patterns, but tracking down the owners of these devices years later proved challenging, as many records had been purged or lost to time. By 2019, the case file had grown to over 15,000 pages, making it one of the largest unsolved case files in Illinois history. The evidence storage facility contained boxes upon boxes of physical evidence, including the duct tape used to bind the victims, which continues to be periodically retested as new forensic techniques become available. The sheer volume of information led investigators to employ artificial intelligence programs to help identify patterns and connections that human analysts might have missed. One particularly intriguing lead emerged in 2020 when a former security guard came forward with information about suspicious activity he'd observed in the shopping center in the weeks leading up to the murders. He described seeing someone who matched the killer's description, apparently conducting surveillance of the area's security camera positions and patrol patterns. While this information was compelling, the 12-year gap between the observations and the report made verification difficult. The case continued to attract attention from true crime enthusiasts and amateur investigators, leading to the creation of several online forums dedicated to solving the murders. While most theories proposed on these platforms proved speculative, the ongoing public interest helped keep the case active in the media and occasionally generated new tips for investigators to pursue. In 2021, investigators began exploring possible connections to organized crime, particularly focusing on professional robbery crews known to operate in the Chicago area. The killer's methodical approach and apparent professional training suggested he might have been part of a larger criminal enterprise, though no concrete evidence has emerged to support this theory. The most recent developments in the case have centered around genetic genealogy. Despite the challenges posed by the limited DNA evidence, advances in testing sensitivity have allowed for new attempts at creating a usable profile. Investigators have been working with genetic genealogists to determine if family tree mapping might help identify potential suspects, even with partial DNA information. What makes the Lane Bryant case particularly frustrating for investigators is the abundance of evidence that seems to lead nowhere. They have the killer's DNA, his voice on tape, a detailed physical description, and a clear composite sketch. They know his shoe size from prints left at the scene, have a sample of his handwriting from a note he left, and even know the brand of cologne he wore that day, thanks to the surviving victim's detailed recollection. Yet somehow, he has managed to evade identification for over 15 years. The case has become a textbook example of how even the most seemingly solvable crimes can remain mysterious. It's studied by law enforcement academies as both a lesson in thorough evidence collection and a cautionary tale about the limitations of forensic science. The investigation has influenced how retail stores approach security protocols and how police departments handle mass casualty incidents in suburban settings. For the families of Rhoda McFarland, Jennifer Bishop, Sarah Safransky, Connie Woolfolk, and Carrie Chuso, the passage of time has done little to ease their loss. They continue to hold out hope that someone, somewhere, knows something that will finally bring this case to a close. The surviving victim, whose identity remains protected, has become an advocate for other survivors of violent crime, turning her traumatic experience into a source of strength and support for others. The Tinley Park Police Department maintains an active tip line for the case, and Detective Violetto, though now retired, still consults on the investigation. He, like many others involved in the case, believes that the killer is still alive and that someone knows his identity. The reward money, now standing at $100,000, remains unclaimed, waiting for the piece of information that will finally bring justice to the victims and their families. The passage of time has presented unique challenges for investigators working the Lane Bryant case. By 2022, many of the original witnesses from the surrounding businesses had moved away, memories had faded, and some of the early responding officers had retired. However, the case continued to generate new avenues of investigation, particularly through advances in forensic technology and data analysis. One significant development came through the examination of familial DNA databases. While the killer's DNA sample wasn't complete enough for a direct match, investigators began working with genetic genealogists to construct possible family trees based on partial matches. This technique, which had helped solve other cold cases like the Golden State Killer investigation, offered new hope for identifying the Lane Bryant shooter. The surviving victim's testimony remained crucial even years later. Working with cognitive interview specialists, she participated in several sessions using advanced memory recovery techniques. These interviews revealed new details about the killer's behavior during the crime, including specific words and phrases he used that suggested possible geographic origins. Linguistics experts analyzed his reported speech patterns, noting elements that might indicate he had spent time in specific regions of the country. In late 2022, investigators began employing artificial intelligence programs to analyze the massive amount of surveillance footage collected from the surrounding area on the day of the murders. Modern AI technology could detect patterns and anomalies that might have been missed by human observers, including tracking vehicles and individuals moving through the area in suspicious patterns. The case also benefited from advances in ballistics analysis. The shell casings recovered from the scene were re-examined using 3D microscopy technology, which created detailed digital models of the markings left by the murder weapon. These models were compared against a national database of ballistic signatures, searching for matches with other crimes that might have been committed with the same gun. Social media has played an increasingly important role in the investigation. The Tinley Park Police Department maintained an active online presence dedicated to the case, regularly sharing updates and responding to tips submitted through various platforms. This digital outreach led to several promising leads, including information about similar crimes committed in other states that shared characteristics with the Lane Bryant murders. One particularly interesting development came from the analysis of cold cases across the Midwest. Investigators identified several unsolved robberies between 2006 and 2010 that shared similar characteristics. A single perpetrator targeting retail locations, displaying unusual comfort with controlling multiple victims, and demonstrating knowledge of store operations. While none of these cases resulted in homicide, the behavioral patterns suggested possible connections. The killer's apparent knowledge of retail operations continued to intrigue investigators. His timing of the attack, just as the store was opening, and his understanding of store procedures suggested someone with inside knowledge of retail operations. This led to a renewed focus on individuals who had worked in retail security or loss prevention across multiple states. The investigation also benefited from new perspectives brought by a fresh generation of detectives. Younger investigators, trained in digital forensics and data analysis, approached the evidence with different tools and methodologies. They began creating detailed digital reconstructions of the crime scene, using virtual reality technology to better understand the killer's movements and decision-making during the attack. In 2023, investigators revealed that they had been exploring possible connections to military or law enforcement training. The precision of the shootings, the tactical approach to controlling multiple victims, and the killer's calm demeanor all suggested someone with specialized training. This angle led to the review of military and law enforcement records, focusing on individuals who matched the physical description and were active during the relevant time period. The case continued to impact the community in profound ways. The vacant Lane Bryant store space was finally repurposed, but a memorial garden nearby served as a permanent reminder of the tragedy. Annual remembrance ceremonies brought together families, investigators, and community members, all united in their desire for justice and closure. The surviving victim's courage and resilience remained an inspiration to many. While maintaining her anonymity, she worked with victim advocacy groups and helped develop training programs for law enforcement dealing with mass casualty events. Her insights into the killer's behavior and methodology proved valuable not only for this investigation, but for understanding similar crimes. As technology continues to advance and new investigative techniques emerge, hope remains that the Lane Bryant killer will eventually be identified. The case serves as a reminder that even the most challenging mysteries can be solved with persistence, dedication, and the right breakthrough. For now, the investigation continues, driven by the unwavering commitment to bringing justice to the victims and their families. The Lane Bryant case entered 2024, with investigators still pursuing several promising angles. One of the most significant developments came from the application of advanced phenotyping technology to the DNA evidence. While traditional DNA analysis had provided limited results, this new technique allowed scientists to predict certain physical characteristics of the killer with greater accuracy, including his likely age range at the time of the crimes and specific genetic markers that could help narrow down his ancestry. The original composite sketch, which had become iconic in true crime circles, underwent a digital age progression analysis. Forensic artists used sophisticated software to create updated versions showing how the suspect might look today, 16 years after the crimes. These new images were widely distributed across social media platforms and law enforcement networks, generating fresh interest in the case. Cold case investigators made an interesting discovery when reviewing old security footage from nearby businesses. Using enhanced video processing technology, they identified a vehicle of interest that had been previously overlooked. The car, a dark-colored sedan, was seen circling the shopping center multiple times in the days leading up to the murders, suggesting possible pre-attack surveillance. The investigation also benefited from the emergence of new witness accounts. Several individuals who had been reluctant to come forward in 2008 finally shared their observations, including a former delivery driver who recalled seeing someone matching the suspect's description, practicing a similar delivery person ruse at other retail locations in the weeks before the Lane Bryant attacks. The behavioral analysis of the crime continued to yield insights. Criminal psychologists noted that the killer's actions, particularly his extended conversation with the victims and his methodical approach, suggested someone who might have committed other crimes that remained unconnected to this case. This led investigators to review unsolved robberies and assaults across multiple states, looking for similar behavioral patterns. A breakthrough came in the analysis of the duct tape used to bind the victims. Advanced microscopy revealed previously undetected fiber evidence trapped in the adhesive. These fibers, when analyzed, suggested exposure to specific industrial environments, potentially narrowing down the killer's occupation or workplace at the time of the murders. The case also saw renewed interest from the media, with several high-profile documentary productions exploring the investigation. These programs not only helped maintain public awareness, but also led to new tips from viewers who recognized certain aspects of the killer's methodology or physical description. The surviving victim's continued cooperation proved invaluable. Working with specialists in trauma-informed interview techniques, she was able to recall additional details about the killer's movements and mannerisms. These details, while subtle, helped investigators refine their understanding of his possible military or law enforcement background. As the investigation approached its 16th anniversary, the Tinley Park Police Department remained committed to solving what had become one of Illinois' most notorious cold cases. The original case files, now digitized and analyzed using artificial intelligence, continued to reveal new connections and patterns that human investigators might have missed. The impact of the Lane Bryant murders extends far beyond the immediate tragedy. The case has influenced retail security protocols, law enforcement training, and cold case investigation methods. It stands as a testament to both the challenges and the possibilities in modern criminal investigation, where advances in technology continue to offer new hope for solving even the most perplexing crimes. Today, the investigation remains active, with dedicated investigators still pursuing leads and analyzing evidence. The families of Rhoda McFarland, Jennifer Bishop, Sarah Safransky, Connie Woolfolk, and Carrie Chiuso continue their quest for justice, supported by a community that has never forgotten the tragedy that occurred on that cold February morning in 2008. The case serves as a reminder that no matter how much time passes, the search for truth and justice never truly ends.